Welcome to That Entrepreneur Life, a podcast about entrepreneurship that takes you from idea to launch and beyond. Each week, your hosts, Andrew Lees and Clint McPherson, discuss different business topics aimed at adding value to any entrepreneur's journey.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Entrepreneur Life. I'm Andrew Lees, and I'm here with my co-host, Clint McPherson. What's up, man?
Not much, brother. Just living the entrepreneurial life like always. But let's go ahead and kick this thing off by welcoming our special guest, Cody Loughlin, to the show. How you doing, brother?
I am living the dream, my friend. I am excited to be here, man. I'm excited to be here with you guys. I love talking about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial lifestyle, and so let's do this.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're really excited to finally have you on, Cody. It's an honor to have you on the show. Before we get into everything, can you just tell our audience kind of who you are and what you're all about?
Whew, how much time you got, my friend?
Yeah, right.
I'll give you the elevator speech, right? So, just some highlight stuff. It's it's hard for me to even kind of say those things, but so I've opened up 14 companies in my life. 10 of them failed miserably. The other 4, I've done over $200 million in sales. And so I've been on Inc. 5000 a couple times. I've exited businesses, and, at one point I had 120 employees, but along the way, I've also been in finance for most of that for 20 years. And so it's a personal passion of mine right now is I'm trying to educate adults and parents to be able to teach young people about money and about entrepreneurship, because I believe that they'll be able to go out and change the world. And so that's one of the things I'm doing now with Money Talkers.
That's awesome. That's a perfect synopsis right there.
For sure, man. That's exactly
I'm also a very happy married man with 2 amazing kids, and that's most important to me in my life right now. So
that's
I
awesome.
want to say that too.
Yeah, man.
Awesome.
So Cody, man, having owned multiple successful companies, right, and having some failures along the way, but as the current founder of the Money Talkers, which we just mentioned, which brings financial education to young people, can you take us back and our listeners back to when your entrepreneurial journey actually started and what it is about entrepreneurship that you're excited about, brother?
Yeah. So one of the things about Money Talkers is that it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek deal, right? So I got into wanting to change. I wanted to have an impact on some of the things that, I've afforded myself a lot of time on my hands. And so as I talked to other entrepreneurs about the idea, all of them there was a thing that showed up and they didn't talk to their parents about money. Right. And then that was the thing, was like, well, their parents didn't teach about money and school didn't teach them about money. Well, when I look back in my life, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial household. So it was very common to me to think like, oh, we got to go out and hustle and go to work. Like I licked envelopes and stuffed them. And, I did things that I went out and mowed grass and all that kind of stuff in the middle of playing a lot of sports. And so as I got older, it was nothing for me to open a company. Like I just assumed like that's probably what I would do. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I got into finance and I took off like a rocket, man. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I took a finance class. I didn't want to be a marine biologist anymore. I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. And at 27 years old, I made that dream a reality. And it was, I thought I had the business world, by storm, man. I had 4 companies, a condo on the beach, Cadillac in the driveway, thought things were good. And then it all blew up. I didn't realize the rocket I was on was a bottle rocket, right? So it got up there, blew up, and at 28 years old, I found myself $700,000 in debt, foreclosure, IRS lien, was bankrupt, didn't file, which was a blessing in disguise. And what I did at that point was I learned that I didn't know anything about money. I really didn't. I was 24 years old. My mom said, hey, you got to get your car insurance. And I said, well, how do I do that? I had 20 employees working for me. I didn't even know how to, I was a mortgage broker and I didn't know what a mortgage was with a finance degree. Like, you know what I mean? So my first night, they were like, go sell a mortgage. And I'm like, okay, what is that? And I was a finance major. So I realized real quick, like I didn't have any education around how money works, what it is. Well, I take that back. I had a pretty good education of how it doesn't work. Right. And so after I became a commercial banker and I went into thousands of businesses in 3 years, I saw a lot of patterns. That was one thing that I have one God has blessed me with has been that I'm able to see patterns very well. And I saw a lot of patterns of successful business owners, and I saw the ones that were super struggling during Great Recession. And So I applied that later on. Had an opportunity to go into an RV dealership, and I got to buy into it and grew it from about $8 million to $51 million a year in sales, and sold out to a publicly traded company. And so
it's like Camping World.
Yeah, Camping World actually bought us out. It was a cool experience, because if you're an entrepreneur and you like shows on CNBC, you know Marco Simonis, right? The Prophet. Awesome dude. No BS like that. Like on the show, straightforward, which some people
He's
are terrified of.
Kind of a handshake guy, right?
Oh yeah, we did it on a cell phone.
Yeah,
we did it on a cell phone. I went through private equity firms, I went through family offices, and then them, and so we had these kind of three competing things. They came in to buy us, and what they said is that they put an offer on the table, and when they came in and they kind of learned more about it, they said, we can't buy you. I was devastated, and I was like, what? Why? And they said, well, you're not ready to be bought. I said, what does that mean, man? I was like, have you seen my numbers? Like, I'm growing like crazy. Yeah. I was like, are you talking to me? Yeah. I was like, did I give the wrong impression to you? Because I didn't mean to. You know?
Yeah. I don't want to hang out for a while here. It's like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where do I sign? So, so we talked, and they said, well, listen, here's the deal. We want to buy you, not just your business. And when we buy you, we want you to do what you've done at your business at a whole bunch of ours. And they said, the problem is that if we do that, then this one's going to crash, because you're the linchpin. You and your partner have everything on your shoulders. Like, you guys are working 70 hours a week in here, and everyone relies on you. As we went around the company talking, everything points back to you two. You're the linchpins. And so we're worried about that, because we don't think we can multiply your talents. So took that to heart, as anything else, and really dove into the same way I had to dive into personal finance to get myself out of that gigantic hole. I dove into like how to make a business viable, right? And just like anything else, it's just simplified it. And a year later came back, and we renegotiated. I had a phone call with him, and said, threw a price at me. I said, no, that was last year's price. I was like, here's a new price. And he said, what in the world would make you think that? I said, last year you were overpaying. I says, this year you're getting a bargain. If you wait till next year, I said, we won't have a deal. And he was like, he goes, all right, give me an hour. He can call me back in like 10 minutes. He's like, got a deal. Let's do this thing. Right. Yeah. And so it was quite an experience. I got a dream job with them. I worked there for about a year, and basically I was 2 seats from the CEO. And then I had, some other interest in businesses, but I really wanted to spend time with my family. So I went back at it and built a new business, and that's what I'm doing today. And then I really wanted to build another one to have some impact, because, we can't turn it off half the time. So that's where Money Talkers came from. So
that's awesome. what, just out of curiosity, what did you do, in that year that you had from when they first, when Marcus and his team first looked at your business? What did you do between then and when you actually sold it to kind of take yourself out of the equation enough that your business at that part, that what they would be buying from you would actually survive?
Yeah. Well, I'll do that in 2 parts for you. So one, I removed my necessity into the business by readjusting the accountability inside of the business, right? And I can break that down for you if you want. But the other part of what I did was, by doing that and removing myself as the linchpin, we went from $37 million in sales to $51 million in sales in 1 year. So here I am in that entrepreneurial trap of listening and thinking that like, I got to be involved in everything. Like either me or my partner, we need to make the final decision on everything, and really stepped out and said, okay, how do there's a few things that we did tactically, if you want to know kind of what we did, a little more nuts and bolts. I'll be happy to share those with you. Yeah. Okay. So some of the things we did was, for one, we made an org chart, and it sounds really basic and dumb, but we had 110, 120 employees, and we just assumed everybody knew where to go for what. And when we did is we defined roles of everybody of what they do and who they answered to. Seems dumb, but we were on site all the time. So people would come in and ask me a question. Well, they didn't know their manager didn't know. They didn't know that the other guy didn't know. And so we had all this chaos going on with that. Didn't realize it.
So they would just go to you. A bunch of people would just go to you. They get the answers, and they weren't really necessarily paying attention exactly what the chain of command exactly. Yeah.
No. So in the chain of command and then there was another problem with that was I was an overthinker, like big time, right? I never wanted to make a mistake. Like a lot of people, in businesses, like I had paralysis when it came down to the dumbest questions about stuff. And so I read this quote that said more harm is done by indecision than wrong decisions. Right. And there was that Jim Carrey movie where it was like the yes man, right? Where every time somebody asked him a question, he had to say yes. Well, I kind of took that a little differently, but I said, every time somebody asks me a question, I'm going to give them an answer on the spot. Yeah. Like I'm going to force myself.
Figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I didn't tell anybody.
It's kind of a muscle that you flex, right? Like I struggle with that too. Like some days I get 10 things, boom, 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 right in a row, that I need to make it a quick decision on, and I make it and I feel efficient and I move on. And then the next day I might have 2 big decisions and I can't get through them. So
yeah. And the worst part is you take that with you. Right. And so the longer you take to make a decision in a business, the longer it takes you to figure out whether that decision was right or wrong, you're not very much more likely to be right or wrong the longer you take. Mm-hmm. You follow me?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If you're going to be wrong, learn sooner rather than later, because you're not predictably, like, the more you think about it, you're not more likely to move the needle that much more towards being correct or being wrong. Right. And so one of the things that I found out when I made that decision, I didn't tell anybody. Right. And I had, like I said, I had almost 110, 120 employees depending on the season, but like, I didn't say anything to anybody for 2 weeks. And every time somebody asked me something, I was like, here's the answer. Boom. And I would watch their face and they were like they were kind of stunned because they were used to me going, let me think about it, or I don't have time for that. Those are the 2 things that always came out of my mouth. And so I'm like, bring that back to me. I don't have time for that. I can't think about that right now. I'm thinking about something else. Right. And it's like, and what I found was I started doing this. And then all of a sudden I was like, it was just like, I had this giant boulder off my back. And I called like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people into the office. And I said, dude, I'm sorry. I have not been giving you answers. And I had this huge kind of like a big meeting thing. And then all of a sudden what I found out was when I did the org chart to it too, but what I found out in that meeting was they weren't even bringing me half the questions, because they would come around the corner and see me in my office and I'd have this like overwhelmed face on and they'd be like, oh, he's too busy. And so there was all these problems around that weren't getting solved. Not even that it was just me not answering. It was just more about like, it became kind of, I was the leader of the ship. Right. And so I was making that a culture piece and I didn't realize I was doing that. The other thing that we did is that we put in a system at a meeting table. So we would have weekly meetings with the 13 managers, and we would go into these meetings. We'd go over financials. We would go over all their different problems and grievances. And then we would 2-3 hours later walk out of there and be like, what did we even do? Right. Like this is insane. And it's like, so we came up with this thing called identify, discuss, and solve, right? IDS. And so we would, when they came, they had specific KPI measurements that they had to come with, which was like, instead of like the sales manager wouldn't say how many sales they had last week, what he would talk about is how many outbound phone calls did they have, how many leads did they get, and what was their conversion percentage. And we would track that every week. And he would have to bring those numbers to us, not us provide them to him. The other part about that was like, okay, what's your problem? What do you guys want to solve? So they had to bring specific problems prior to the meeting. Instead of just having little epiphanies being mad at each other, they would have to bring specific problems, and then we would actually discuss them and then make a solution at the table so all the managers knew at one time. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but that moved the needle so far for us, just the way that people had organization and leadership. And then at that point, they all had control. They also had a little bit of we did a dollar amount to like, up to this dollar amount, it's on you to make the decision. Don't bring it to me or my partner. And it was like, I think it was like $250 or $500 for some of them. It was like, I don't want to know about it unless I need to. I was like, but you handle the problem, you make it go away. And also on top of that, like, if you're going to make a decision and later I come back and ask you for the reasoning why, if you say the words, I don't know, that we're going to have a problem. If you say anything other than that, and like, I thought about it and this was what I thought was the best way to handle it. If it was the wrong way to handle it, then we just address it, talk about it right then and realize we learned from it. If it was the right way to handle it, it was like, man, great job. I'm glad you thought that through. I wouldn't have thought of that. And so I leveraged everybody's brains instead of just me and my partner, and it just took off like a rocket.
I think
you empower everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. You're dead on. Just like Andrew said, the empowerment of that whole process right there. I mean, we even talked about that on your show, right? Empowering the kids to make financial decisions, or, you know, going into the grocery store and saying, here's some money, go buy something for us to eat or something. Give them some decisions. And man, dude, it's so awesome to hear how you've applied that just across the board. And I was like, man, see, it's the empowerment that we always want to talk about. When you have employees, you got to empower them, or they're not going to think they're worth anything, or you're not going to trust them, or whatever it is. You know, you give them enough empowerment so they can make those decisions on their own. You
can train them to make decisions, or you can train them to ask you questions. It's literally, there's two choices, right? Like, all the problems fall on you. And now so every time if I said, hey, Clint, I need to know what you want to do with the Johnson account, right? And you're like, oh, okay, let me think about it. Guess whose problem it isn't anymore? It's not my problem anymore. I'm just going to sit back and wait for you to come to me. Now, meanwhile, that's not your job. And two, when are you going to remember to come back to me if I never say a word to you? But I don't. And then now all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, this guy's on the phone, ticked off. And I'm like, dude, I asked you 2 weeks ago. It's not my fault. Right. And then you're going home, and then a week later, you're like, I forgot to have that. I got to do that tomorrow. And then like you end up with all these, I got us. Right. I got to do that. I forgot. I got it. Right. And meanwhile, that's what you're paying them for. And so what you should be doing is empowering them, and then being there for guidance or a soundboard, right? But you need to train them to think, and then you need to train them to own their own accountability piece of what their position is. But if you haven't given them what their accountability piece is in the beginning, because remember I said the first thing we did was the org chart with accountability, right? So they knew what they were accountable for and not for, because before I assumed they knew, they assumed something totally different, right? And so we ended up in this place where it's just la land. And until we drew it out, we found out there was a lot of skeletons in there that we didn't know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense that it's amazing too, how that could unlock the potential of a business, right? You know, I mean, just first of all, probably a better work environment. You know, people were probably a little happier, a little more.
The whole thing changed. Yeah, the whole thing changed, man. It was like overnight. And I'll tell you, the biggest benefit out of the whole thing was speed, right? So the customers weren't waiting, the employees weren't waiting, I wasn't waiting. All this stuff was speed, and that's how we jumped up. Like, we jumped $14 million in 1 year in sales, right? And the service department shot up, and the customer service scores shot up, and the tension in the dealership, because in dealerships you have competing businesses. Like, anytime the service department charges the sales department loses money, right? And vice versa. So there are these constant like tug of wars inside of a dealership, which I never understood before until actually owning one. But the tension went down because everybody was making money, because everybody was moving fast, and the customers felt that, and there was an electricity inside of the company. And when that happens, there's some magic that happens, right? When things are moving and going, people don't have enough time to get into their, politicking and fighting and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. They just feel good about the progress and just moving on with their day instead of getting hung up on all these little things that just hold them back.
Yeah. Like you said, you got 10 things done in that day. You go home, it's like, awesome, I killed it today. And then the other two you don't make the decision on, and like you just unrest at home.
Oh yeah. It feels like a complete waste of the day.
Yeah.
I'm like, what did I actually do? Even if I thought about it, even if I was working hard to try and figure those things out, it's like, oh man. So I think that's some really good advice. Just make a decision as quickly as you can, because I have seen exactly what you're saying where, I'll think about something for a few minutes. I mean, that's not to say that you just like throw a dart at the wall and you're like, yep, this is,
No, you make the most, like I said, you can't say, I don't know.
Right.
Right. So if you're making a decision, it's with the knowledge you have at the time, you make the best decision that you can. If you need more data and you need more knowledge, then go get that. But don't say, I just did it because I don't know why.
Right. Just did it because
I wanted
to get through it.
So you guys are marketers, right? And you have a marketing company. And so like, how many people have you seen that have sat on the fence from your recommendations for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then they come back and they're like, now I'm ready. But like, how much money did they lose in those 6 months, right? Like and you turn it on and it takes off and they're doing great. And it's like, man, you could have been doing this for 6 months. Like, because you've been sitting on your hands wondering if it was the right decision, as opposed to just if going out as an entrepreneur. I think that's where we run into like a catch-22 inside of us as an entrepreneur, is that like we want to go, we're problem solvers, right? At heart, that's what we want to do. We want to fix things. We want to problem solve. We want to make the world a better place. And then what happens is like we get to be business owners, and because no one's ever taught us how to be a business owner, then we're like, we start worrying if we're making the right decisions on how to do stuff, and we become managers and things. And it's like, it's no longer going out about the problem. We start letting all the other little stuff get away from that North Star principle where you're running in a certain direction to solve a certain problem. Well, then it's like, well, now I'm working about like, which payroll company should I use? And do I have payroll? Right. So like, and then you got like, like which business card should we have? Like, what's our logo going to be? And it's like, no, go out and solve the problem. Like if you identify and fix and solve the problem, the rest of that stuff is very minimal impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause your sales will benefit from just solving the problem and getting in front of the right people. And then sales cures all and everything else falls into place.
We used to call it sales cures sins. Right.
Yeah.
So
makes up for some bad decisions.
Yeah. But if you make bad decisions and learn from them, you just learn another way not to do it. Right. And it's kind of the way that, if no one's going to teach you how to do something, you kind of need to learn through experience, And so that's kind of one of the things with Money Talkers is like, I want to bring more content to people so that they don't have to go through some of the experiences that I went through, because I want them to leverage my experience so that they can go out and do bigger things, much like a coach.
I think an entrepreneur in general, I mean, we have to make the decisions to fail at something or move the needle forward. And then if it sets us back, again, like you said, we take away from it, we learn from it, and we know what not to do in the future. And that's a lot of the reasons why we're having this podcast or why we're having these discussions, so we can get all this stuff out, that people know that entrepreneurship's not easy. But you also got to move forward and continue not to say, I don't know, or, hey, let me get back to you, right? Like, you got to make a decision, stick with it, the most educated decision with all the things that you have at that specific moment in time. And then if it's something that really needs to be put off, or if it's something that all the team needs to be brought in on, and you is like, look, this is a decision that we all need to make together, right? Or whatever it is, but that decision is being made today. Let's do it. Let's get in a room. Let's hash it out. And let's move forward, because again, you will not, like you said, you're not going to get any closer to success, right? So you need to go ahead and make that decision. If you did, boom, you learn from it. Okay, we failed. Now we know what not to do. Now we know how to move the ball forward, or what play to call, audible, whatever it is. But let's keep this going so we can actually, learn from this failure or learn from the success as well. It's important to rehash how everything went, because just because you succeeded or won something, what can you do when you sit back and just look at everything and talk about how everything went? It's like, okay, we did this, we accomplished this mission, but at the end of the day, let's talk about it. What are the key takeaways? What can we debrief to where how can we get better? Just because we accomplished this mission, it actually took us maybe longer than I thought it would, but we did it, right? Like, we came in right at, how can we do it earlier next time? Or how can we accomplish this faster? And what can we do to improve along the way? And I really think you got to look at that as well,
Yeah, so I would say that there's some things that stuck with me that showed up later in my life that I didn't realize what my dad was teaching me. See, I lost my dad when I was 19, and I played a lot of sports when I was a kid. He's always been coaches and around and all that stuff. He was teaching me all these like sports analogies, and one of them was, you can't steal second with your foot on first, right? And he used to say that to me like all the time, and I never understood why. I'm like, I got it, dude. Like, I can't run to second base with my foot on first. And now as an adult, and I realize as an entrepreneur how valuable that thought process is, right? Like, you got a goal of going to go steal second base. You can stand on first base worrying about it all day long, but unless you take off running, you're never going to do it. You may not get there, right? And if you don't get there, then you got to, what's the hot word today, right? Pivot, right? So you got to pivot and do your new thing. But so, but you cannot, if you don't take the risk, you don't run, you're not going to win, man, because you signed up for this life, right? This is what we signed up for. If you wanted to be told what to do every day, all day long, with a certain paycheck that comes in, God bless you. I've done it a couple of times, and it's just, it's not me. It's not in my DNA. Right. But the thing is, I know that if I don't have a floor, I don't have a ceiling. Right. And so I can go build as high as I want to build because I've been in positions where I absolutely smashed the other team members on the thing. And my paycheck difference was very different, very small, just like, oh, well, here's $1,000. Thanks for generating $200,000 more than everybody else. And I was like, seriously? Like, because I had a salary and that's a position. I always felt I feel constrained in those situations because I can't use my God-given talents, which is, it's trying to see a better way to do things. Like you mentioned, Clint, like, you're even though you did good, like, okay, I'll give you another one that it comes up a lot. So I use a lot of phrases, right? But when I hear the phrase like, well, that's the way we've always done it, it's successful, right? Like when I hear someone say that's the way we've always done it, when I ask why we do certain things certain ways, then my hair in the back of my neck goes up because I'm like, well, is this the best way to do it? Right. And it's like, so unless you deconstruct how you do things, or when you have, like, let's say mild successes or, medium successes, like, is there a way to get a big one, right? Is there a twist we can do there? Is there a little bit of tweak we can do and then knock it out of the park? And so that's the fun. That's the thing that lights me up. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, the potential is what we live for, what we do this for. That's it. It's the no ceiling. There's not as much value in stability. There's, no risk, no reward kind of thing. And it's like, it's so basic, but it's true. I mean, you're not going to, get as much for reward if you're not risking anything. So it's like that in, personally, in business and investing and anything you're doing. It's so true.
I think a good way to get through that is to identify what you're working for, right? And so when I was, when I was climbing out of that hole and I was working 70 hours a week, my wife, we had our first kid and we decided she was going to stay home. I mean, we really could have used that second income. We could have used that to get where we wanted to go farther. And it was like, but that's not what I signed up for, right? I signed up. So my goal was, I wanted to have an exit. I wanted to have multiple streams of income, and I wanted to have time for my kids within 10 years. And I basically set a goal. I wanted to be FIRE, which is financially independent, retire early, which means basically that you have passive income that outpaces your bills. And I thought, and here I was sitting here, $700,000 in the hole, no job, IRS liens, foreclosures. And I'm like, well, I want that. I didn't have kids yet. Right. We weren't even there. We weren't even thinking yet. And it was like, okay, but I want to have the time with my kids because that's what I wanted to be able to do that in the future. And so for 10 years, I set a goal out and I backed out where I needed to be every year. And then I tracked it, right? Because whatever you put light on shines. And so whatever you track improves in a business. It works the same way in your personal life. So I built a personal financial statement that was probably the ugliest one on the planet. Right. It was just a little Excel spreadsheet. And then the bottom line was like this giant negative number. And I'm like, all right, that's motivating.
Yeah. So you just see that go slowly down.
Yeah. And then every month it was like, it was like, I became a big fan of, like, I think coffee gets a bad rap because everybody beats on it. Right. It's like, don't drink that $4 coffee, but it's like, I did math on like, but I blocked off some money in my budget for the things that I wanted to do that were important for me. And so I will budget to get to a goal and not taking away from something. And so when I did that, I said, okay, do I want to be able to go out to, I live by the Florida Gators, go Gators, but I live by here and I was like, do I want to go to a football game? Okay, that's going to cost $120. Okay, do I want to eat lunch out for $20 a day every day next week, or do I want to go to the Florida football game? At that point, I take leftovers. But I wasn't taking away my lunch. I was just choosing my priorities, And so by doing that, I had that why on the other end too, which was, wait, why am I doing all this work and all this hustle and all these, I had side hustles and I'm doing everything I can because I wanted to get to FIRE in 10 years. And I knew what I had to do because I put a plan on paper. Was it a perfect plan? Not even close. Was it a plan? Yeah. So it was a lot better than no plan.
Yeah, but you adapt with it. So yeah, we've talked about a few of the experiences that probably led you to, or that help you, with the Money Talkers, with, that business and, with your podcast and how you're trying to educate people. But what was that initial spark? Like, what got you thinking about, oh man, this is definitely, I really need to educate people about finance? And was it more to educate them about their business finance or personal or both?
I'll tell you I knew the exact moment. I was in a finance class at UCF, and I was a marine biology major, and I sat down and I'm sitting there and I'm watching this professor talk about compound interest. And he's like, I know exactly what he said. And I know, and he said, he said, if you save $2,000 from the time you're 16, every summer you cut grass, you save $2,000 a summer from 16 to 20, and you put that away at a compound interest of whatever, 8%. He said, you will have more money than if you save $25,000 a year from the age 50 to 60 at 65 when you retire. And I said, what? And he said that $8,000 in the compounds. And I started doing the calculator that, we had to do in class. And I'm like, my mind was blown. And I thought, man, I got to learn more about this. You know what I mean? Like, this seems like a way better way than working every day of my life and not having any money. And I'm like, this sounds cool. And then I got mad, man. I was sitting there and all of a sudden it hit me. And I was like, I was thinking about all this pointless classes and time I spent in school, in high school. And then I got even madder because then I thought about, well, wait a minute. I'm in a finance class at college, and there's probably 95% of the kids in my class are never going to have a finance class in their life. So what happens to those 95%? Why do we have pottery? You know what I mean? Like, why do we have pottery class? Like, why do we have art class? Like, why do we have, why do I have calculus 2? Like, how often am I going to use this? But you couldn't tell me what a mortgage was or about compound interest or how to save money in a retirement account and what it would do for me later in life. Like, every kid could be a millionaire if a 16-year-old saves $10 a week from 16 to 76 at regular compound interest, 9%, it ends up like $1.8 million. $10 a week, $40 a month. That's all you got to do your whole life. And you can end up a millionaire because they're rich with time. Right. And so I knew at that point something was wrong. And I was 19. And I was like, this is messed up. Like, I don't understand. And then I was like, well, I don't know. I'm going to worry about me and, kind of the 19-year-old thing. Right. And so as it came up, when I sold my companies and I was working for them, and I was like, man, it was literally, if you'd asked me the job that I'd wanted for the last 10 years, it would have been the job I had. And I just one day walked in and was like, hey man, I'm leaving. And they were like, why? I'm like, I got to go impact the world, man. Like, this, I'm not doing it. Like, this is an amazing position. I'm making big bucks. But I need to go. And I was like, I need to do something else. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And then one day my wife said to me, she said, she's like, you have never stopped talking about that moment about 10 years ago where you were teaching a class of 7th graders, and the reaction I got out of them when I started playing these money games with them. And she was like, you lit up when that happened. She was, you need to go do this. And I was like, yeah, I do. Like, I need this. This is something that's it's an exponential impact. Right. And so if you taught 1 million kids to be millionaires, it's 1 trillion. Right. So originally it's called it Trillionaire Movement, but I can't spell. So, I was like, I got to get rid of that domain. So I thought about that and I'm like, that's not that many. Right. That's not really that many that we could reach out to, we could touch, like we could get them. And if they got the concepts of even a little bit, if you taught them 30 personal finance concepts and you taught them a little bit about entrepreneurship, they would be light years ahead of where I was.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we're just not taught that kind of thing growing up. At least I think. I mean, I wasn't. Most people, I don't think. Where I went to like a college prep school, and prepped me for college. They actually did a great job of that. Except that even in college, they didn't teach me about. Right. I was an engineering major, so. It's like, that's cool, but what about money? What about the thing that
don't worry about that. Yeah. Just sign this loan. Don't worry about that.
Exactly. At that point right there, it brings us to the next question. Really, when it comes down to it, and how it could tie in. And for you, Cody, why do you think we don't learn more about how to manage our finances from an earlier age? I mean, do you think it's really that taboo to talk about it? Or is it because most people, even our parents and educators, actually don't have any better understanding of it, than the rest of us?
Yeah. I was asked on an interview, they framed a question to me and it said, most educators agree that personal finance should be taught at home because teaching it in the school is not very effective. And then she said, what do you think about that? Kind of like an aha gotcha, right? And I looked at her and I said, how effective is not teaching it in school?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like, I get it.
What's the gain for what's the upside to not doing that?
I get it, but it's like, the kids that want to learn it, or maybe they don't even know about it. They don't even know that they should be learning it. But they're like, have you got a text message from like a 16-year-old because they've been in English class for 10 years, right? It doesn't look like Shakespeare coming across the thing, right? And so as I kind of dove into this, what was really kind of crazy is that there's these things that we have built into us, and there's kind of what's called your money story, right? And I think that people don't realize that they're writing it daily and they're writing it with their families, but there are already chapters written, right? And so if your parents didn't talk to you about money, or if you constantly saw your parents fighting about money, or you grew up in a tough situation, or you grew up in a lavish situation, those are all money stories, and they've shaped the way that you focus on it and you see the world with money, right? And so those things are inside of you, but unless you take the minute, you take the time to kind of dig into that and realize, okay, what I've done to this point in my life is not necessarily right or wrong. It's just my money story, right? It's just the chapters I've already written. But here's the flip side of that. I get to write the ending of the story, right? So if you're a parent, there's two things that they say are just anxiety inducing conversations, right? One's birds and bees and two is money. Well, I ain't tackling the first one, right? No way. Not. So on the second side though, what I found when I was just absolutely devastated and in this hole, when I got, but just amazing, there's a big story behind how I got there. But when I became a commercial banker, I had a good salary and I was learning all this stuff about money and trying to figure it out. Like I was listening to Dave Ramsey constantly. Like I was consuming everything I could. And what I found was I started opening up and telling people, my friends that I made, and, I was talking to them and I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. Like I'm so far in the hole. I haven't filed taxes. I haven't done that. And then what I found was they also had these anxiety pieces inside of them where they would just kind of be like, hey, I know this isn't as bad as your situation, but what do you think I should do with this? Right. And so it started opening these channels. And as I began talking about it, the tension that was built around it in my own brain was never, ever talk to anybody about money. It's uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes you uncomfortable. But when I started talking about it, they started talking about it and we all started learning and digging into it. And so the more I kind of got even, I couldn't wait to have those conversations. And it was great because it was like, we just knocked those walls down. And so when I look at it now from, that was 10 years ago, when I look at it now and I say, okay, as I said, when I went to other entrepreneurs and I told them my idea because I wanted to get feedback, all of them were like, oh my gosh, we need this. I've never met a single person who was like, yeah, I'm really glad we don't teach anything about money or entrepreneurship in school, right? We all know the problem. It's crazy. I haven't met anybody who was like, I'm glad we didn't either, we definitely should not do that. And so we all have this and we all have to deal with it, right? Every single person has to deal with money in their life. And you don't all have to deal with entrepreneurship, but you all have to deal with money. And so we all know there's a problem. And so for me, that presents a big opportunity of saying, okay, we can change this thing because it's the will of the people wants to change. Right. And so how we do it, I'm on that journey trying to figure it out as an entrepreneur and trying to look at it from a problem solving position. But I know that I can do this. I originally started off wanting to teach kids, but as I talked to parents, I realized that they were the ones teaching the money stories to their kids. And so how do we reach out to them? Because there's another part of that, which is if you didn't talk to your kids about, I would ask them, so your parents talked about money? I said, no. I said, and it just got real uncomfortable, but I'm okay with asking hard questions. And I say, are you teaching your kids about money? And I'd wait and there'd be and it'd be like, no, but I need to. I'm like, I know, right? Let's do this. Right. So we need to have those conversations because if you don't, and you say, well, that's not how I learned. Well, guess what? You're sending them out into a financial world that's not set up for them to win, man. It's not set up that way. That's it. But it's set up that way, right? If you don't go educate yourself on how to do this, and you don't educate, if you don't know the rules, you can't play the game. Yeah. 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 But as an entrepreneur, when you see that problem, what I see is opportunity, right? So I see it and say, okay, what in the world would happen if we fixed that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
What would happen, man? Could you imagine?
Yeah.
Right?
And at the very least, if people didn't just have to go into debt to figure out, or they didn't, going into debt, it definitely happens. You know, there's things that you get. I mean, obviously, if you can have no debt from as early on, from as, you know, as young as possible, that's the ideal situation. Most people do incur some debt, and hopefully it's in like a smart way. But you know, you might have a mortgage, you might have some student loans, and hopefully you're paying that off as quickly as possible. But you know, some people, I went into credit card debt, and I don't even think I was spending like crazy, but I didn't understand enough about my personal finances, and you know, I just wasn't. I was probably making some decisions that I thought were smart at the time that just weren't, and put me in a deeper hole. And that is, you know, when you get like 3 credit cards maxed out, you know, that's like a kind of a scary hole to be in for sure.
Well, that right there shows how the system is broken in itself, right? Like for you to be allowed to do that and continue to do that. Yeah. And then they even do it with people that don't have good credit scores or whatever it is. It's like, man, they'll just throw money at you just so they know it, that back at the end of the day, they're ruining your life. You know?
Yeah. I mean,
so I would say this.
Go ahead.
So I would say this. I was teaching these that same class I was telling you about. I was teaching these kids, right? And I showed them something, because that day, like, I have a Lowe's credit card. Like, there's good debt and bad debt, right? So first of all, that would be one of the major classes I would have, because leveraging up on investment properties or on business purchases that pay for themselves and provide income and passive income, those kind of things. Like, there's good debt and bad debt, but there's also like, I have a Lowe's credit card because I get, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15% off when I buy stuff, and I rehab houses and I buy real estate. And so I use it. I pay it off before the end of my statement date. So I always have zero balance. I pay zero interest on it. Well, I forgot one month, right? And it happened to be that day I got the bill, and it came in and I had a $4,000 bill on it. And it said, if you make the minimum payments, then over time you'll pay, I want to say it was like, you're going to pay $9,000 for this. Right. And it was like, you'll pay it off in 17 years. And I'm like, so what I did is I was like, okay, I'm sorry. It was a $3,000 bill, and I was going to pay $9,000 for it, because it was 3 times. So I said, okay, I went and got some normal household stuff. Right. And I went and said, okay, if I went on Domino's and I ordered a $25 pizza, right? I'm like, I was in the student thing. I was like, would any of you guys pay $75 for a Domino's pizza? They're like, no, right? I'm like, would you pay $400 for a pair of Nikes if they were $120 Nikes? And they're like, no. I'm like, you know, would you pay $9 for a Gatorade? And they're like, what? No. And I'm like, then don't pay for credit, right? Because that's what you're doing, because you're sapping your future. You're sapping your future, right? And so they got that concept very easy. I mean, it was a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation, and there were kids like, I am never going in credit card debt. Like, I heard them say that originally. This little group of kids, and I'm teaching them, and but it was instant. And I know it's there, man. I just know, I can feel it. And when you see these kids, their reactions, there are studies that show that kids as small as 3 years old understand the concepts of money. And it's kind of crazy. We have to watch our words. We have to watch our thought processes in front of them. They say more is caught than taught, right? You go into the store and you tell your kid you can't afford it. Oh no, we not get any toys. We can't afford that. We don't have any money. Daddy doesn't have any money. And I'm walking by and I pick up something off the shelf and I'm like, ooh, how about that? And I pull that plastic out and I whip it through and I'm like, all right. And he's watching.
Yeah.
She's watching.
Wait, what the heck? What?
Yeah. Like, well, you didn't have any money and all of a sudden now you got money and you just ran that little plastic thing through there. Like, and then I don't trust you about money. You really want the stab? Because that was what I got when I read that. And it was like, now your kids have started a pathway of not trusting you about money because you're selling little white lies to get out of this stuff. And then they watch you behave differently. And I'm like, oh,
well,
ouch.
And I mean, I think two things with that is you can look hypocritical, with that, but you're not going to pay for your kids thing, but you're going to pay for your thing, and you're telling them that you don't have money. I mean, there's
scarcity. It's instant scarcity though, right? So we're not buying that because we don't have money or we can't afford that. Instead of changing their mindset, like, how do I afford that? If you wanted this is what you'd have to do to get it. Are you willing to do that?
Well, and the other thing is they might see you, swipe that credit card whenever you want something, and they think that really it's a bottomless pit. It's like endless amounts of money on this little piece of plastic.
As soon as I get one of those, I get what I want.
Exactly. And as much as I want, because
exactly.
Then they're not seeing the repercussions of,
well, daddy didn't have money. All he had, but he's got one of those plastic things. So if I don't have any money, all I need is one of those little plastic things, and then I can get what I want.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, life is so easy for adults. They've all got these little plastic things that have endless amounts of money on it. You just buy whatever you want. And, and the only reason that dad doesn't drive a Ferrari is because he just doesn't want it.
He doesn't want one of those things. Yeah. He needs a bigger one of those little plastic thingies.
That's awesome.
And so, for me, like, I just, I know there's a need there. I'm figuring it out as I'm going, and it's just, but I also know that people know there's a need there. And that's encouraging to me because, when I was a kid, I didn't know that I needed to learn, personal finance. I didn't know that. I had no idea what it was. I didn't even care, and now there's a study out where like 78% of the kids that are Generation Z, which are still in school, that they surveyed them from Experian, and they want financial education. And to me, that like lit me up because I was like, man, I didn't even know what it was. And then these kids, they're in a different mentality, man. We talk about being in the information age, right? And we talk about how amazing it is to be able to go look up the things you want to know. They live that.
Oh, right? Yeah.
My 6 and my 9-year-old dude, they don't know anything other than YouTube. They don't know anything other than Netflix. Like, they don't know what cable TV is. I had to explain it to my son. We're in a hotel. And he's like, put the show on. I'm like, you can't. It starts in 10 minutes. He's like, why? I'm like, because there's a guy somewhere in New York that decided that's when you could watch it. He was like, what? Why? And I'm like,
why would you do that?
Yeah. I go, I get it, dude. I get it. Your way's better. I'm just telling you what it is. And
it's the stuff we always dreamed of, but now like kids,
he can sit down and watch 20 episodes of Pokemon in a row if he wants. You know what I mean? He can watch anyone ever want. I had to wait every Saturday for Garfield to come on, man. That was messed up. But what was really funny is he went, the show started and he was like, okay, cool. And I'm sitting there, I'm not paying attention too much. And all of a sudden, toy commercial comes on, whatever. And he looks at me and he's like, hey, put the show back on. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, put the show back on. I'm like, it is. I'm like, that's a commercial. He's like, what's a commercial? I'm like, well, a commercial is when someone wants to sell you something and they interrupt the show that you're watching, even though you didn't want them to, and then they show you a product to try and get you to buy it. And he's looking at me. I'm like, dude, it's the same thing as TV. I get it. It's better for your way's better, but this is what this is. Like, I don't know.
Interrupt marketing.
We're interrupting the show. But it's double just
dipping.
That gave me kind of a reframe of my age and their mentality difference, So I think, you always think you've got the young vision, but these kids, they have a totally different mindset on the way they access information and the way that they educate themselves. And to me, that's really encouraging. Yeah, it's really encouraging, as long as there's good content out there for them to educate, because what they put in their brain is going to seek to validate. And so that's why things like this with podcasts, if you're an entrepreneur listening to this, you are doing intentional listening, and it's going to make a massive difference in the way you think about the world, because you're going to try and validate that there are options of people like myself that were way off, probably way worse than you're doing off right now. If you think you're struggling, that there's a way to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, or that's okay to talk about problems, and it's okay to address these things with people and break down the walls and have these anxiety-inducing conversations. You're going to feel a lot better about it. And so when you do those kinds of things and you have these intentional listening, like my son intentionally watches TV and he enjoys it a lot better, right? Like, you have intentional listening and you've already taken the step to being, better at life. You're being better at your job. You're being better as a boss and as an owner and as a business owner. And if you're listening to things like this, like you've already made the decision, which is the hardest part. You've taken some action. Right. And I think that that's an amazing thing you guys are doing for entrepreneurs, because it is a lonely world as an entrepreneur if you don't have those kind of things. And it's hard for anybody. It's hard to talk to anybody about it, because the last thing you want, you don't want to bring it home. You can't help it. Right. And then you can't talk to employees about it because they're like, oh, I wish I had your problems. Right. And it's like you kind of isolate yourself more and more until you find people that you think that all the problems are just yours, And it's like, they're not, man. You just need to talk through it and find other people that are listening to things like this, that you can realize that you're not on that island, that it's okay to go out and solve it. So,
yeah, you got to be honest with yourself and the people around you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to do, though. It's the same thing with the money talk, right? Like, I don't want to talk to my kids about money because I don't want them to think that I'm bad with money or question me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's
and so,
true.
Or you think you don't know, right? I don't know enough. I'm not a financial genius. Somebody else will teach you that stuff. Right. But I guarantee you this, you're light years ahead of them. If you know the way not to do things, like we talked about earlier as an entrepreneur, if you know ways not to handle money, you don't have to come out full blown and be like, man, I was bankrupt when I was 28 years old, son, way to go. 6-year-old, get out in the little league field. It's like, you don't have to do all that, but like, bro, you can have conversations with them about it. Like,
they should learn from that. If you can't teach your kids about that, then there's a huge missed opportunity, right? Because why should they have to go through the same thing just to learn, right?
Who's going to care more about their outcome than you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you're the one person in the world, or the two people in the world, or, some families are bigger, but like that really only have one intention for the kids. Right. You only want the world to be better for them. They only want them to have great lives. Like you're the ones. Right. And so if you're the ones coming from that position, if you don't know how to talk about something, then go educate yourself and then go back in there and redo it. You got to be one step ahead, and that's it. And you can go have the conversations, or I would challenge you to go do it together. Right. I'll tell you a great system that I literally had a podcast earlier today with a guy who's been all around the world running insurance companies, and dude's been like, he's money central dude, right? Everything, he knows everything about it. Right. But we were talking through it, and I said, man, I have a program in my household where I will reward my kids for reading books. Right. So I'll challenge them. If they want something, I'll say, okay, you got to earn it by doing X, Y, Z, not just chores, but like, okay, above and beyond, because I want them to get in the habit of like, if I educate myself, then I can get better things. And so I was talking with them, and we came up with this idea, and it's almost like I would reckon it to like the book report, right? Like, obviously don't call it that because nobody wants to do that. But, but I was thinking about this, and like, if you could take your kids and have them go out and learn one financial concept, it doesn't even matter. Writing a check, right? What's a checkbook? Like, how does money get in an ATM? Like, what's a mortgage? Have them learn the habit of researching it so that they come back to you and they have to teach it to you, and then they get a reward for doing that. It could be small as going to get an ice cream. It could be a $5 bill, like whatever it is. But that habit building of, if I educate myself better about money, if I educate myself better about entrepreneurship, I'm going to get more reward out of life and out of my business. Right. And so I thought about that, and I'm like, man, I talked to him. I'm like, I'm implementing that this week. Like, I can't wait. I'm going to send them out, and I'm going to just like, look, you got to learn. They're 6 and 9 years old. Like, the concepts can't be massive, but the idea is that if you go and do these things, it's a habit building, right?
You get the wheels turning, man. You get it. You get the brain just, focus on some of the important things, not always YouTube, right? I mean, obviously they can learn from YouTube too, but not always the Pokemons of the world, because they're not teaching about finances.
There's consumption and production, right? And so, and it's good to have some of both. We need to shut it off sometimes, but that's one little tidbit you can take away as a money talker. Saying, hey, you know what, like, think about these things with your kids, that you have open-ended conversations with them when you go in. Don't have an agenda when you ask them. I hated the question. I don't know if you guys did. I hated it when I was a kid, and they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was like, dude, I know like 5 jobs. Like, I don't even know what there is. Like,
the astronaut, fireman,
G.I. Joe, right?
It's the Amazon crew, right? Like, it's like whatever you can get for Halloween. It's like doctor, like fireman, policeman, like whatever you can order on Amazon. There's a Halloween costume. So, but asking them, I think I like to teach more about how to learn and how to think, and I like to try to come up with an outcome. So if I say, hey, what are you into? If your kid's into video games, I don't know. If they say, oh, I'm into video games, like, well, okay, how does a video game business work, right? Someone has to be the person that comes with the idea, right? So you have these people. You have technical code writers. You have illustrators. You have you have people that put them onto discs, or you have them put them into game pieces. You have people that build the consoles. You have people that build the parts in the consoles. Then you have people that distribute it to them. Then you have people that sell it, market it, and then you have people that manage the whole thing. There's a lot of jobs in there, man. Transport, right? There's a lot of jobs in there. And so you can take that time to sit down with the kids instead of saying, video games are going to ruin your life one day and you're not going to get anything done, you lazy bum, kind of thing. Like, like the whole, like, video games are going to fry your brain, but to say, hey, man, like, if you really love video games, maybe you could work in that industry. Let's talk about some of the jobs that are in this business, right? And so it's kind of fun to be able to talk about those things. So what I like to say is that if you're going to talk to your kids about those things, and I think it would have been a lot better for me, and it's probably why I'm probably a serial entrepreneur, is because I never could pick any of those things I wanted to do. None of them sounded interesting to me, other than baseball player, which that didn't fly. So, I would say, like, if you're going to have questions and conversations with your kids, the best advice I could give you is to have an open-ended conversation with them. And I took that advice one time, and I had probably one of the most important conversations I've ever had with my son. And it literally about knocked me to my knees. And because somebody, I'm learning constantly from my own podcast, which is one of the reasons I love doing it. Right. I get these tidbits. You guys know what it's like. You get these frameworks and you get to pick people's brains, and then you come out of there and you're like, oh man, like my head's spinning and things, And so that kept sticking with me. She said it to me. She's like, man, just ask an open-ended question when they ask you stuff that makes you uncomfortable. And I'm like, all right. I'm walking by, man. I was taking stuff out of the grill, and I dropped stuff off, and I'm coming back in, and my son's like, hey, Dad. I was like, yeah, son. He's like, how much money do you have? And I was like, I'm like, my first thing was like, don't worry about that. And then I'm like, wait, I'm the money talker guy. Like, can I tell him exactly what I have? Like, how do I explain this to him? Is he going to get this concept? Like, are we talking about like net worth? All these things are like in like half a second's running through my head. And I remember what she said, man. She said, ask open questions. So I looked at him, man, and I said, buddy, why do you want to know that? And he says, Dad, I have $100 bill, which is his prized possession. He's like, I have $100 bill. And if you don't have $100, I want to give it to you so that you know what to do with it for the family, because you should have my $100 bill. And bro, I was like, I mean, had I not had that in my head and thinking about that, I would have missed that moment. And it was like one of the most endearing moments of my life is that my son was more concerned about the family, and that he had $100 bills and he wanted our family to have it in case I didn't have one, and here I was like running through all these reasons of not to talk to him about it and all this stuff. And so,
yeah. You were afraid he was trying to get technical, but like more curious about the dollar amount rather than just making sure that in general, the family is okay.
And I would tell you, you can apply that in your business too. So when your employees come to you and they ask you an uncomfortable question, or they ask you stuff that you think that there's an agenda behind what they're saying, you need to step back and ask them, well, why are you asking that question? Because a lot of times there's a bigger meaning behind it that they're just the only way they know how to ask, and I find that there's a lot of similarities between being an entrepreneur and being a parent.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect segue into my next question, because I think understanding personal finances ties directly with business finances, right? And you clearly have a lot of experience with both. And as entrepreneurs, we all do, but, and I think if we don't know how to manage our own money, how can we expect to manage money in our business? What are a couple of basic things that we can do to get our money right, both personally and in our business?
Know your numbers. That's really the easiest, simple thing I can tell you, because when I found out when I went into businesses in 2009, kind of told you what happened to me. I lost 4 companies and huge hole, right? And here I'm this commercial banker and I'm walking into business. I was supposed to be this financial expert. Felt like it's such a sham, right? I knew how to be an entrepreneur. I had no idea how to run a business. I was there to learn how to run a business. That was my whole goal. And so at that time, there were a lot of businesses in the shape that mine were at the time when I lost them. And my job was to go in and check the loans for the bank. Right? They had all these loans out over a couple different counties, and I was going to these business owners and they're struggling, and I know they're struggling, and like, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but like the bank's paying me to go find out what's going on. So I show up and I ask for financials. When I do that, I generally know within about 5 to 10 minutes, because I told you I've seen patterns as one of my gifts. And so when I walk in and I start talking to an entrepreneur and I'm like, hey, after the niceties and all that stuff, shaking hands and whatever. And I said, hey, where are you at this month over last month? And they're like, oh, we're doing good. I'm like, well, it's more specifically. And they're like, like we've had some ups and downs. It's like that. It's almost like that Chamber of Commerce event, right? Like we're talking. So and it's like, things are experience. Good. Yeah. And I'm like, well, do you have last month's P&L and then maybe this month's P&L? And they're like, yeah, I'll call the accountant and get this for you. I'm like, I'm like, okay, well, how are you doing this year to date over last year to date? I'm like, good. It's tough. It's tough out there. And then, and then I would be like, no, like I just knew, like immediately. It was so crazy because I kept walking into these situations and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to have some really tough conversations with this person. And then I would walk and I would walk into the next one and I say, hey man, where are you at this month or last month? I'd be like, listen, we've cut expenses down 30%. Well, our top line, we're not selling as much, but what we've done is we've cut the accounts that we didn't need to have. And we're focusing double down on our good businesses that are still running strong. And I mean, it was like instant. You know what I mean? Like I knew, and I was like, okay, my comfort level was completely different. And I would say, where are you at this year or last year? And they would know the exact same things. They would know their numbers. And so as this happened a whole bunch of times, I would have people in like 2010 asking me what business they should go in. Cause it was kind of like almost over and everyone was kind of seeing there was a lot of opportunities because things were way cheaper around when they used to be. Right. And it was like, okay, like maybe I should go into businesses, and people would ask me, and I'd say, man, it doesn't matter. They're like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? I'm like, dude, I got doctors who are broke and I got doctors who have got tons of money. And I got a sand manufacturer that makes tons of money. And I got a guy who's a car dealership who doesn't have a dime to his name with terrible credit. Like it doesn't really matter the industry that you're going into, because you got, you guys, you've got personality traits of a business owner entrepreneur, which is why I was able to go into an RV dealership. I'd never ever been in a dealership. I'd never been in an RV, and I was able to walk in there and take the thing in a skyrocket because instantly I knew what I needed to know. I needed to know my numbers, because if you know your numbers, you can make decisions. And when the fault that I see with most entrepreneurs is the same one that I see with parents that don't want to talk to their kids about it. Right. If you don't know where you're at, there's anxiety. Right. And the thing is like, we talked about sales cure sins earlier. Right. But again, you've got two pieces. So you've got sales, you've got your cost of goods, and you have you have a gross profit. Out of that gross profit comes your expenses. That's the general setup. And then at the bottom of that, there's a bottom number, right? And so what I would say is that, there is a real impact if you review your financials consistently, maybe weekly is what I would suggest, but at least monthly, and stack them next to your financials of the previous month and the previous year. You can look down it without being an accounting person, without being like, I hate accounting. I don't like entering numbers, but I like looking at charts stacked up next to each other because I can see where there's problems, right? And I can see where things moved. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, what is this? And I circle it and I go dig into what that is as an entrepreneur. You're able to address your problems quicker. It's the same thing we talked about earlier about making a decision. Well, you are able to get the scoreboard on your decision much faster if you pay attention to your numbers. So you can change the ones that you made the wrong decisions on real fast if you're able to say, okay, look, last year we had personnel expense of, $30,000 last, October. And then this October, we have personnel expenses of $48,000. Even though we made 10 grand more, we really is this really, the return that we want to come back? Because now we're really losing 8, right? And so you see these things when they're stacked up next to each other. You don't see them when you're kind of just like, well, we probably need to get another guy, or we need to sell some more, or how do we get a little more traffic, or like, you've got to do not just the operations piece of it. There are 6 pieces to a business, right? You've got sales and marketing, which kind of go together. There's sales and marketing. You've got operations and customer service. You got finance and HR. You need to be in all 6 of those pieces of your business. And if you've written a business plan when you started your business, it puts you in the minority of business people that start companies, right? You need to address all 6 of those criteria. But here's the thing that I would challenge you that will make a massive difference for your audience, is that you need to review your business plan at least annually. I would suggest quarterly. And in those things, you go through, and I don't care if it's a good plan or a bad plan, you need to have a plan at least. Start with a very bad plan, right? The chef starts as a busboy, right? And he works his way up. The podcast, Joe Rogan, go listen to Joe Rogan's first podcast. They're atrocious, right? And the guy just made $100 million. But the reason is because your consistency. And so if you start and you consistently review your business plan, your sales planning is going to get better. Your marketing planning is going to get better, right? And then when you make that plan, you give it a time frame to review it. It might be 90 days. It might be 30 days, right? It might be 6 months or a year. But like what you do is you write down exactly where you want to go, what you think it's going to take to get there. And then you're going to say, okay, when are we going to get there by? Right. And then you give yourself some benchmarks. And then when you go to review it, it's like, okay, what did we think 3 months ago? They're like, oh my gosh, we thought we were only going to do $100,000 in sales in 90 days. We did like 200. Right. Okay. Well, what's the new goal? Right. And you're there instead of just in that day-to-day life as an entrepreneur where it's like run, problem, problem. You have to take time to stop and step back and address where you're at and where you're going. And if you're doing something to get yourself there or not. And it's like, when you do that and you go through each one of those pieces, because what happens is we all gravitate to what we feel like our strengths are, right? If you're an operations guy, dude, you don't want to talk about marketing, right? You want to know how to get the project done, right? You want to make sure, and if you're an operations guy, you're probably much better with employees. If you're the sales guy, right, and you're like, man, I'm gonna drive sales. I love talking to people. Boom, 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 boom. You're probably not that good at operations, right? But what you have to do as the entrepreneur is you either have to take the role of each one of those 6 pieces and decide it. Like HR, man, nobody ever thinks about it, right? But there's a big piece in there, and a lot of that comes through salaries, right? Your accounts receivable, accounts payable. How fast do you get your money? How fast you pay your money? Your collection speed, right? Your customer service. Like, are people recommending you? Are they raving over you? Right. And so you have to have these plans, because it's kind of like, oh, well, we do that. We just do it all the time. That's where you get into that entrepreneurial spin, right? Where you just feel like you're in the washing machine, just like, oh man, all day. Like I got to deal with this and I got to deal with that. And it's like, you don't lay out a plan for your one. If you have a team, lay out your plan for your team and then have them execute. Now they have direction, at least quarterly, if not monthly. They have a direction and a target to hit. And then you can benchmark with them if they're getting there in the time frame, right? And now, you have speed, you have clarity, you have accountability, right? Kind of tying back to the whole thing we talked about in the beginning. You asked me what we did. I became a business owner, man. And I started doing these things, and I was planning these things out with them. And then I was giving them their responsibilities and their benchmarks and clarity, and then the speed and accountability to do it and the authority to do it. And when I did that and I was there to support, it was a whole lot different than me constantly telling them what to do. And then they felt a lot better. The tension came down, the speeds picked up, but also we all knew where we were going. And when everybody was rowing in the same way, the boat went a whole lot faster.
I love that, man. I mean, you touched on so many things just then. And with that said, though, I mean, from our entrepreneurial journey, we all go through highs and lows, right? And with that said, for you, what has been the most difficult thing about being an entrepreneur?
Oh, that's a good one, man. So it's the times where you second guess yourself, right? When it's like, it's the doubt that creeps in occasionally. I'm naturally a confident person, So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because when I have my failures, or when I feel overwhelmed, is probably the worst part, right? When I feel trapped and I feel overwhelmed, and I feel like, when I'll give you one specific example that happens to me is I keep my email as my to-do list. And when that thing starts piling up and it gets past a certain point, I'm like, I just want to go, I don't want to do any of it. Right. And it's just like it's like this overwhelm of like stuff. And then it's like, so, yeah, if you've ever read Alex Sharfin's EPT, it's called the Entrepreneurial Personality Type. I read that book 3 years ago. It's just this little tiny thing. And it's, 40, 50 pages. I felt understood for the first time in my life. But part of the book, it talks about being in momentum. And so as an entrepreneur, we don't see black and white quite as much. It's not like wrong or right. It's not like okay or not okay. It's feeling like we're accomplishing and we're moving forward and we're in momentum, or we're not. And being stuck is depressing. It's painful. It's when you don't feel like you're making the progress you should be making, and you're not, or even worse, you're not making the progress you should be making because you walked home and you didn't feel like you accomplished anything. It's that internal fight that we have. But the second you can recognize this, and this is one of the things that like was very empowering for me, was that I could realize that I can change my paradigm, right? And when I'm carrying around those things, I use a mental trick where I picture myself carrying like duffel bags of sand. And it's like, I picture myself doing that, and I stop and I just close my eyes and I take a second, I take a couple of deep breaths, and I picture myself letting go of those sandbags and then going to do whatever the most important big domino is for me. Right. I have been able to, I have a 7-figure business now with one employee, right? How in the world do you do that? I've never even been to the business. Okay. The reason I've been able to do that is because I have had such a hone in on this one concept of having the big domino. And it's a marketing term that I learned a few years ago, but basically they say like there's all these objectives, and if you picture them as dominoes, right, there's these little objectives not to buy from you, but there's usually one big one, right? You got to identify what that is. And if you can attack that big domino, it'll knock all the rest of them down. It's the people's reasons not to buy from you, right? So you're, as a marketer, you're trying to alleviate those concerns, right? But the thing is like, we're trying to alleviate all of them all the time. Right. And so it's like, and then you end up in overwhelm for the customer, and a confused mind doesn't buy, right? Confused mind doesn't buy. But usually if you can get down to it, there's probably one big one that if you tackled it, like if you could figure out what their super pain point is and you could solve that for them, then you can knock all the rest of the little stuff, the little like, whatever it is. I don't have enough money. I don't have this. I don't have that. The stuff that they're trained to throw to you not to buy, right? There's usually this one big domino that's in their life that's, if you can knock that thing down, it knocks the rest of the reasons not to buy from you out, and they'll buy from you. Well, I took that and I applied it to business, and I said, okay, when I get up and I feel that overwhelm and I've got 127 emails in my unread box, right? And I'm like, oh, where am I going to start? I don't have time. I want to watch all these videos and trainings and all this stuff. And like, I should be doing this and that. Man, if I look at it and I go, okay, what's the one thing that if I did this today, I would move the needle in my business? And so I look at it like, if I got that one thing done, and it's usually you can figure it out pretty quickly. It's the thing that's been lingering forever. And so if you picture this, it's important and unurgent usually, right? And so it's in this box of like, man, we should really do that. We should do a business plan. We haven't done one in 3 years. We've been doing this. We've been running around spinning in circles. Like, we should do a business plan. If you sat down, first of all, it's going to take you a couple hours of planning. It's going to save you tens and tens of hours of execution, right? And so if you said, okay, well, if you can identify weekly what that big domino is that's going to move the needle in your business, and then you can get the people who work for you to identify in their department what the problem is and what the big domino is that if they knock down, it would, and outside of their regular scope of work, if they knocked it down, it would be an efficiency tool. It would be a process. It would be an organization. It would be a conversation that I need to have. It would be a rearrangement of an office or office space or whatever that thing is. If you can find something that will move the needle in each one of their worlds, but specifically as the entrepreneur, if I can knock down my big moving piece, my big needle, my big domino goes over, the rest of the stuff that I kind of need to get done doesn't matter nearly as much as that big domino does to my business. Right. And so if I knock that big one over, even if I got nothing else done the rest of the day, I can wake up the next morning being like, all right, new day. You know what I mean? Time to go. And so and there's always these things that'll do that. It takes time. It takes time to identify. And I would tell you that when I was working 70 hours a week, I was massive burnout. And I never left the dealerships. Like I was always there. If I wasn't there, I was at home with my kids because I wasn't going to be that guy. And so when I sold them, I started going to the gym in the middle of the day. I would take an hour. I never left for lunch. I would always either order in or bring something with me because I never wanted to leave. I was always worried that if I wasn't there, it was going to be a problem. I never took time, right? I never took time for myself. I left. I started going to the gym in the middle of the day. And I put headphones on, listen to a podcast or listen to music and I was listening to audiobooks, and man, I had more ideas and more, it's called a clarity break. As I looked into it, but I got bigger and bigger pieces to move the needle in that hour away from work that had such a major impact over what could have happened the hour I spent there doing nothing, right? Doing busy work or whatever. You've got to take time to work on your business, and you got to have a space away from it, because if you do that, you can identify those big pieces. And then when you identify the big pieces and you put those as the priority list so that you can go and knock those down and put those at the top of your work funnel, right? This is what I'm doing first. This is, if I knock this thing down, I don't care if I send those emails back, right? Like, like Jimmy in accounting can wait if I go do this and I go tweak my website because I know I needed to do it. Right. I go added that page of SEO, or I go into my PPC account and I figure out a way to get my leads for $2 cheaper because I just haven't looked at it in 6 months. Right. Like whatever that thing is that's got big impact, you do that thing. Yeah. You do that one thing and you get in the habit of doing that. Relief comes out of that. Right. Overwhelm kind of goes away because you realize there's something that's important and that's what you're doing, because what we end up doing is become firemen at work. Right. We chase all the little fires, and
the fires don't go away. They keep adding up. The little dominoes keep stacking up, but those big ones, keep staying there. And I think the same thing. I think the same thing almost every day when I attack the little dominoes. It's like a very quick feeling of like relief and satisfaction. Like, oh, I finished that. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, it didn't really move the needle forward. No. Maybe it's something I had to do. And there's plenty of that kind of stuff, right? Like you can't get to the big dominoes until you knock out some of the small ones for sure. But yeah, whenever, even if I get 2% finished towards that bigger, goal, or towards that bigger thing that I know is going to have a bigger impact, I feel even more accomplished than getting 100% done of this, something that's really small.
So think about this. Exactly, if you were able to move the needle 2% per week, right? In 1 year, your business is 104% up. And you start compounding that year after year, right? But if you do all those little things, are you going to be 104% up at the end of the year? Nah, man. And especially as an entrepreneur, I will tell you, I heard this line too. It says, whatever is teachable and repeatable, you should be training someone else to do it. Because your needle moving, just being the entrepreneur, your needle moving is between your ears, man. And if you're doing stuff that's mindless, you need to train someone else to do it, because one, you shouldn't be doing it so that you can do growth thinking, and you can do, because as an entrepreneur, you can't turn it off. So the second you take away the space that you're occupying with that, you're going to fill it with, I got to go find a new problem to solve, or I got to find a line to open up, or a new customer to get, or a new way to do this thing. Like, you free that time up. But the second thing is that, they're probably better at it than you are. That's a fallacy that we think we can do everything in our business. You probably can, But there's people that enjoy the things that you don't enjoy to do out of those 6 buckets, and they're way better at it than you are. That's their core competency, man. That's their zone of genius. And if you can identify that where your zone of genius is not, then put somebody who has that zone of genius there, and then come up with, the pieces where they have a goal, a plan, an objective, and a time frame, and then check their progress and support them. Don't be the one trying to do all that stuff, because if you do, you're never going to do it all the way, for one. And 2, you're not going to do it as well as they did. And 3, when you're out there like I was trying to shop for a security system for 2 days on Amazon and calling companies and doing all this stuff so that I saved an extra couple $100, like we're doing $4.5 million in sales. Like, what am I doing trying to save $200 on a security system for 2 days because I'm better at shopping on Amazon than my parts girl who always wastes all my money, right? Nah, man, like you need to get back into the big picture, right? You got to get back in your zone of genius, which is go move the needle with that big domino. Let other people handle little dominoes.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, and speaking of bigger dominoes, of doing fewer things and like maybe one big thing that you can do, kind of in that same vein, as we wrap up this episode, Cody, if you can only leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that be?
Easy. Take action. Okay. I would tell you that get out of the learning loop, learn what you need to know, and try. Don't strive for perfection, right? Perfection is the equality of good, not great. Right. And so what you need to do is if you learn something, take this away. Knowledge is not power. That whole thing, knowledge is power, that has been wiped out. Right. That has been completely wiped out by these little magic boxes that we carry around with us to be able to look up something instantly. Right. You wanted to know how to fix your air conditioner. 2 seconds, man. YouTube University. Right. That is not any problem. But if you watch YouTube for the next 8 hours and you don't go out there and turn a wrench, bro, you accomplish nothing. You might know how to do it now, but unless you take action, it doesn't matter. And so what I would tell you is to take a little bit of time on the entrepreneurial side. And a lot of this is very applicable in the house, right? Is take inventory of where you're at currently. If I said something earlier about reading your numbers and that struck home, which it does with a lot of people, man, because I was one of them, right? I was at the end of the year at the accountant's office dropping the big, banker boxes off with all like the statements and receipts and stuff in there. I'm like, here, let me know. Like I had no idea. I was looking at my bank account every day. If there was money in there, I'd take it out. If they didn't have money, I'd go find some. Right. And but I would tell you, if you're an entrepreneurial side, take control and take inventory of where you're at and be honest with yourself and be honest with people that you can talk to about these things, because seek out some help if you need it, but you have to have your numbers. Okay. You're the only one who cares about that. I can tell you if the rubber meets the road and there's a problem in the company, the people who are there are going to be gone. Right. It's your responsibility to right the ship, your responsibility to captain the ship. And so if you don't like numbers, learn. If you don't like numbers, get somebody who can read them to you, at least pay someone. Okay. But you have to do these things because you have to do that one specific thing. If you're not great at marketing, there's lots of marketing teams. If you're not great at sales, then, there's lots of sales training. There are not a lot of entrepreneur trainers. Right. There's not a lot of business owner training. And so what you need to do is be able to understand where you're at, where your money is going, and then tell it where to go. Right. Don't wait for it to tell you where it went. Go tell it where it goes. And so on the flip side, on the family side, I would tell you, man, you just got to start talking. That was one of the reasons that it became a money talkers thing, is that like I realized you got to break down the anxiety that you feel, that, your worry of what your kids would think about what you've done or what your money story is so far. Like I said earlier, your money stories to this point has been written. Theirs has been written as far as they're along in life. They hopefully got a lot more chapters than you do. Right. But you got chapters left too. And so if you don't like where you're at, or you want a different money story, then go rewrite go start learning so you can write, right? Like seek it out, go get the information. It's there for you. Right. And so if you start to take action, and if you're worried about your kids, they're going to get tested, man. They're going to get money tests, and you can either study with them and prepare them and help them. Doesn't mean they're going to pass a test, but at least they're going to be armed with a lot more information than if you send them out there to do the test with no information and hope the world teaches them, because the world is going to teach them. And hopefully it's going to, it's not as bad as mine was, because it took a long time to recover from it. And I'm very fortunate that I did, but I sought action to change that. And so those are the two things I would say. If you're in a business owner, know your numbers. Okay. You got to do this. You got to have plans, and because you got to be the captain, and you got to have numbers, some way or another. You've got to look at these things and make a habit of it. And as a parent, just let your anxiety go, because what's bigger at stake for them is that you want the best life for them. And that has to be bigger than you worried about what they thought about what you've done so far. Right. Or the reason that you don't know enough. Go learn it with them, have them learn it and teach it to you, but start talking about it, because if you do, it's going to have massive impact on their life, because they are time rich. And like I told you guys earlier, $10 a week for 60 years, these kids could be millionaires, multimillionaires. Right. And they only put $32,000 in. Right. That's the funny thing, right? They only put $32,000 in and they get that. So they made no other good decisions in their life about money and buying a house and a business and entrepreneurship. If they could just find a way to get $40 a month, and then they're good. And so, but if you don't start introducing those concepts and start having those talks, you're going to find out that the anxiety is a lot bigger than it's a lot less satisfying than the joy that you'll have having these fun conversations and knowing that you're having this impact on them. Because it really, ultimately for me as a parent, that's all I really want, is I want to have a good impact on my kids. Yeah,
Love it. I love the way we brought that episode to a close, guys. And I think that's a wrap for this episode. But from the both of us, Cody, man, we want to thank you for taking the time here today to join us and adding value in what we're trying to do on our podcast, brother. Man,
I just want to thank you guys for having me here. And I also want to thank to those that have listened to us for quite some time here on here. But, it's a valuable message you guys are bringing. And I want to thank you for bringing it to the world, because there's a lot of good that can come out of us being able to talk about things like entrepreneurship and money. And I hope it has an impact.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, I really appreciate those words. Guys, thank you so much for listening to That Entrepreneur Life. To learn more about what Cody is working on, check out themoneytalkers.com. If you like what you heard today, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or any other major podcast directory. You can also find us on all the socials and on our website at thatentrepreneurlife.com.
With that said, we also want to quickly give a special shout out to our family and friends, to include all of our listeners, followers, and subscribers. Thanks for continuing to support what we do as entrepreneurs, and don't forget to join us next week for another episode of That Entrepreneur Life.
Thanks for listening to That Entrepreneur Life podcast. Be sure to visit thatentrepreneurlife.com to join the conversation, access our show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode as we continue to add value. Until next time.